On this help video, we're going to look at defining rows and looking up those column values to give us a little foundation before we jump into table function writing with students. If you recall, back in the data cycle, we looked at different question types, and one of those question types was the basic lookup question. A question where if I just look at the table, I can see the value in the table. One of those cells, I can look at the table and give you the answer. So example is, how many legs does Felix have? Or what species is Sheba? If I look at the table, I can answer that question easily. Well, how many rows then do we need to answer a lookup question? Well, the first question, how many legs does Felix have? I just need this one row. I can go across and look at the legs column and see, oh, Felix has 4 legs. So we just need one row. What code do we have in Pirate to allow me to define a single row if I just need to be able to look at a row? Well, that's the row-n function. And here's its contract. What is its domain? It takes in a table, of course, needs to grab that row from the table, and then it needs the index of the row that you're looking for. Well, remember these indices are a little tricky and students just need a little time, and so do we as teachers, to get used to these indices. It doesn't start at 1, and I've labeled it here. It starts at 0, and I just tell students, start at ground 0. The very first row of data is index 0. So when I'm teaching them with the rows, I don't say go to rows 1 or row 2. I call it index 0, index 1, index 2, and just say it's the first row of data, the second row of data. So the first row of data is index 0. Using that language helps to kind of get that index language used better. So index 0 would be, so here's an example, row-n, go to animals table, index 0, and we'll get back that range is a row. What does a row look like? This will be the first time they'll see that. Here's that row, animals table 0. There's that first row of data was Sasha. Sasha is a cat there. And now we get that, but look, we have the headers followed by the values that were in those headers. So this is a brand new data type. It's the actual data type, that row. How do I get the second row? The third row. The second row will be index 1. The third row of data will be index 2. And they practice pulling out some rows. We know how to define values, so we can also define these rows. We could define that first row of data. Since it was Sasha, we could say, well, Sasha equals this row-n animals table 0. However, with our work with our data set, it might be more interesting or more useful to us to define some rows by some properties we might be using down the road. For example, we already know, as we've been looking at our animals data set, that I've done a scatter plot and I see, there's a lot of heavy dogs and there's cats and rabbits. Maybe I want to start doing some graphs that are species related. Maybe I'd rather have a cat row. I'm going to maybe define rows by this species. I'd like to have a cat row, and you can see here a lizard row, a rabbit row. Let's define some row by properties we would be interested in looking at down the road. So let's maybe name this cat row instead of Sasha row. We don't need to name every single row in the data set. Sometimes when I'm training, that's things that teachers think they have to do. We're not defining every single row. We can just find an example of a cat row and name it as cat row to be used as an example later on as we are using it. So here's just some examples down here. We've got dogs, maybe male. Maybe you want to do something and just have males and females we want to compare. Maybe you want young and old. As you can see, there's listed here, fixed or unfixed. So why do we define the rows? Well, maybe we do want to use Pirate to help us find rows. If we have thousands of records in our data set, trying to find the index and do all this is kind of crazy. We would like a computer to do some finding of things for us. But more than likely what we're going to use these rows for is to help us when we're writing our functions later on, our table functions. We're going to want to filter our data set by maybe just getting dogs and make a table of just dogs. And when we want to do that, we're going to want to test that our functions are doing what they want. And we want to test that with a set row to see if it's picking up a row correctly. And that would be nice then to have these defined rows ready to use. So then students say, let's think about your own chosen data set. What are some properties in your data set? If you're doing Pokemon, maybe you like a fire row or a water type row. That might be something you want to think about in your data set down the way, and get them begin to think about their own chosen data set and properties they might want some subgroups for later on. Now, if we've got a row, we might want to grab a value from that row, like how many legs does Felix have? That means I need to go to a column. I need to access something in that row. We call this the row accessor. I always had a lot of fun with this in my class. I called this the claw. We use the brackets, the square brackets, to grab something from a column. So I always take the claw and grab. So we have the row, just like we've just defined, row animals table 0, and go grab that column name. And there you could see we grabbed Sasha's name. However, if you've already defined that row, let's get rid of some of that redundant code. And we've named it cat row. So let's do cat row grab the name or grab the age, as I've given the example here, and see that cat row was 1 year old. We can grab the value that way. So now we have our row accessor and our column accessor there. We can get everything. Let's answer our original questions, which was, how many legs does Felix have? So I pulled up the data set, and I don't have these rows defined, so we're going to just use the row-n contract here function, and it's index for 5th row of data, and go grab the legs, and we see that yes, Felix has 4 legs. And then what species is Sheba? Sheba was the 5th index, so I grab the species there and see that Sheba is a cat. So what is row-n used for? It can give us our lookup question answered there, but it is also going to lay down the foundation for writing table functions and for writing those examples for those functions.